Hi, my name is Megan. Welcome to Maverick Publishing Consultants and another of our occasional conversations with Mavericks about their areas of expertise and their interests. I'm delighted to be joined today by Nancy Roberts. Nancy, let me hand over to you so that you can introduce yourself.
So I'm Nancy Roberts. I'm COO and Head of Tech and Content at Maverick. So very interested in all things from the sub to pub workflow perspective, systems, processes, content, and obviously at the moment, particularly AI in all its weird and wonderful applications.
I mean, it's the big topic at the moment, right? So,
The narrative around it that exists is not helpful, and that people are a bit under. People get very swayed by the kind of big ticket items around AI, and what I'm more interested in is are we using it for the right things? If this is going to happen to us and it's going to happen, at least let's be sensible about that. But in actual fact, that's not what's happening. A lot of what's happening is big amounts of noise about things that have already happened, which is too late to do anything about, or big lots of noise about things which kind of look sexy and interesting, but actually you don't necessarily need AI to do half of those. And then there's a whole raft of stuff that we could be doing with AI, but not many people in the sector are, and that's where I think the focus should be, basically.
could we start with some use cases in publishing where you
Yeah.
think, okay, actually, there's some real potential here?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the classic ones that most people are using AI for are around research integrity. So using tools to screen out generated AI content, paper mill content, that kind of thing. And I think that is somewhere where you can't do that by hand, right? The volume is just too big. The problem with that is that no publisher is ever going to keep up with the technology at the paper mill end. So in effect, trying to look for AI generated text is you're always going to be two steps behind. So whilst I think it's a useful kind of first screen for some stuff, as we've seen, it throws out so many false positives and false negatives, and it adapts much more quickly than we can. These tools that we're using are not moving at the same pace as the tools that the paper mills are using. So, there's some publishers I've been talking to are saying we might just stop screening for generated AI content. For Gen AI text, we will continue to screen for, you know, fraudulent authors and things that just don't look right and fraudulent citations, but the race to sort of track down the copy is not there, because as soon as we all start going, oh, generated AI has loads of tortured phrases in, they go, right, fine, we will just fix that. And all those tortured phrases then disappear, and then everything gets through, right, because you're no longer sort of picking up any of those flags. So I think it just needs you need to be intelligent about how you use it, basically. But I do still think research integrity is a good use case. It's a challenge that all publishers are facing, and nobody's really got the resource. The resource has got to
Mm.
come from somewhere within existing editorial workflows. And, apart from people like Springer Nature, nobody's got a big team of people sitting there working on this. So there needs to be some automation. But what we're typically seeing in those spaces is using the tools, but using a lot of human oversight around how those results are interpreted and what needs to happen next. That is going to continue to be the case, I think. I don't think many people are comfortable with just letting a machine make the decision. But on the other hand, at some point they might have to start doing that just because of the volumes involved. It's just a huge problem. So I think, that's an interesting use case, but it's one where I think people are being quite cautious and being quite human in the loop, which is probably right for now. But I think that's something that, will come under pressure, not because we want it to, but just publishers just won't be able to sustain it, I don't think. And of course, the tools will get better as you start tuning it to the things that you're acting on as those results come out of the tools. It will start to sort of identify, okay, we're really worried about author affiliations that look a bit dodgy. We're slightly less worried about text that looks a bit dodgy, and so on and so forth. So it will improve. The use cases I think are more interesting. The ones that aren't being taken up are around agentic AI, basically. And anyone anyone who's ever been in a editorial office or production office of a journals publisher knows that an awful lot of what is being done there is really managing the flow of data. It's metadata, it's the content going backwards and forwards in its various iterations through the various processes it goes through, copy edit and peer review and all of those things. All of that is a massive data management problem for publishers, and that's where agentic AI can really make a difference, because you don't need human judgment to send papers back and forth and know where they are in the system. Those are just practical tasks that need to be done. And I also think it's much less controversial because we're not talking about LLMs in that regard. We're talking about agents that you can build to do a specific task in your workflow in exactly the same way as you would build an automation in an existing system, for example. So we're not getting into the whole intellectual property aspects, the whole, is ChatGPT killing the environment questions, all of that. I mean, those things still apply to some extent in agentic AI, but it's you're running much more focused models, usually in your own environment rather than in a sort of data center owned by, the owners of ChatGPT or wherever. So that's where I think there are use cases that we should be exploring much more.
That's fascinating then. So then in some ways the agentic AI is literally doing the same job as, more of a traditional management system where you're telling it, if these certain conditions are met, send this to, the next stage of production.
Yeah.
Then
and if necessary, send the information that you've done that task to all the systems where we need that information, whether that's a production tracking system or it's a tracking system for authors to see where their content is, all of that stuff, which at the moment tends to be, in many cases, a production editor going into a system, typing it in, sending it to someone else who types it in somewhere else, all of that stuff. That can just be much more streamlined using agents. Because again, there's no judgment required. You just say, if this piece of content is moved from here to here, inform all of these systems that thing has happened and that we're at that stage in the process.
Yeah, and then just to choose something extremely simple for the purposes of, everybody watching the video being able to understand it, because I'm aware that not all of our viewers are publishing. Something as simple as, if this has its figures, if the figure labels are missing, then
reject it back to the author or whatever you would do in that scenario anyway.
Tell these 5 people, because the author will have to generate the figure titles, they'll have to be proofread, they'll have to be attached to the right figures in the final document.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. Or it could be, this author sent in lots of supplementary material, and that's always been a huge problem in, how we handle that sort of stuff. And obviously there's more going on in that space now, but you could just have an agent which catalogues all of that supplementary material, reads it, sees what it is, gives the production editor or whoever it is a list saying, okay, there's a data set, there's some transcripts of, qualitative interviews, there's blah, 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 blah. What do you want to do with these? And again, that just saves a production assistant or an editorial assistant opening each file. Okay, that's a data set, right? That's a research interview. It can just do all of that stuff for you and give you an output that enables you to go, okay, great, we will publish these as supplementary material on the website, or in fact we won't publish these and we'll say to the author that they can go into the repository, or whatever you want to do with them. It's just that tedium of going through all of those files and trying to figure out what they are. There's no reason why an agent can't do that perfectly well.
I suppose as well, the advantage then, but one of the potential big advantages of that is speed in turnaround time, which we know is of massive concern to authors. But we also know that editorial, when they push back, would say the reason it doesn't just take us 5 minutes is because we're maintaining high standards. We're trying to do a really good job here. So is that one of the sort of outputs in general that you would see, is just things getting a little bit faster?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, we know a lot of the time lags in turnarounds from articles to publication, from author submission to publication, are the human aspects, right? It's, can we get the right peer reviewers? Are they available when we need them? How quickly can we get this through our own systems and processes, which often are quite manual and involving lots of different people, lots of different systems. we can't necessarily solve the people aspects of that, but if we took out all the other bits of time where things are just waiting for something to happen, or waiting for someone to check a file, or waiting for confirmation that it's been received in a certain place, or delivered to the vendor, or come back from the vendor, all of that should go away. So, you know, if we take that out as our first step, we should see an improvement. Then it comes into, okay, what can we do to streamline the other bits of the process, which are more human dependent? But again, things are evolving. You know, can we use, you know, this idea of the third peer reviewer being a sort of AI bot? And, you know, most people get very worried about that, but really what you're talking about is doing some of those basic checks. You know, is all the material there? Does this scope fit the journal accurately? Have we got the right list of corresponding author names? You know, just really basic stuff that stops that from proceeding until someone's checked it and fixed it. So, you know, there's evolution of that, but if we were to start right now and just say, okay, if I sat here as a production editor and said, right, I put this information in this system, then I have to collect information from there, then I have to upload these files to an FTP site for the vendor to pick them up and do their thing, and then they put them back, and then there's a trigger to my system to tell me they've come back, and then I send it back to the author for them to, you know, all of that, we could really massively get rid of loads of that time, I think.
Do we want to touch on AI and peer review?
I mean, I'm not a publisher. You know, I've always been on the operations side, but I think, you know, again, it's the same problem that we have with paper mills. The volume of papers is so huge these days that we have to be realistic about what peer review is going to look like in the future, because all the researchers and academics I talk to are like, we are breaking, you know, we are overwhelmed with requests for peer review. We're getting dozens a week. Those are just requests, you know, never mind the actual ones that we say we accept and we'll go ahead and do. You know, that the point in my mind about this, and again, I caveat this with I'm not an editor, I'm not a researcher, but the point in my mind is that peer review is a fantastic system, but it is a very flawed system. And any researcher who's ever submitted a paper will tell you, reviewer 1 loved it, reviewer 2 hated it, reviewer 3 said you should have read the work of who inevitably turns out to be the author of the paper. You know, because we're humans, right? We make mistakes, we make shortcuts, we make assumptions. I think there's potential for AI to do more in terms of peer review. I think that the barriers will be cultural and sort of emotional rather than technological. And that's not to say that those aren't the right barriers. Again, I'm not a huge expert in this, but I do think that, you know, you can build AI tools to be whatever you want, really. So you can build them to be unbiased. You can build them to say, go away and read all the research in this very niche area. You can provide that research to them. This is all the research, the peer-reviewed research that's been published. These are all the people we know are players in that field. Go away and read it all. They should then be able to read an incoming article in that subject area and tell you if it looks valid against certain criteria that you might have. Does this look like repeatable, you know, a repeatable experiment? Do these authors look like ones that we know and trust and believe in? You know, that might be part of what the future of peer review looks like, just getting that sort of summary assessment from a tool, and then maybe just having one peer reviewer who casts their eye over that and says, yeah, okay, if all of these things are present, this is probably pretty good research.
Great. And going back to sort of the production, admin, change management kind of aspects of it, I've been in-house at publishers when new major workflows and tools were introduced. And we're not here discussing taking the human elements out of anything. So therefore, humans have to adopt these new working methods. Famously, publishing is not a fast industry.
No.
So do you think we're on the verge of major change, or do you think that actually things are going to be a bit slower than that while publishers assess?
I think we're at an inflection point where it could go either way. And what I think the factors will be in where that goes is how coherent the organizational strategy is. Because if I was a production editor now, I would be setting up Claude co-work for myself to do all of those admin tasks. That's just what you do, right? If there's a task that you do all the time, you look for a way to automate it, you look for a way to simplify it. If it's a straightforward task that doesn't need your judgment. So if I was a production editor in a publisher right now, I would have Claude co-work linked into all my systems, and I would just be saying, go away and find me all the tasks that are on my list today, all the things that have moved on that I don't need to worry about. Provide me with the files that I need to look at from within those file systems, draft me an email for the author, all of that. So my feeling is, and anecdotally I've heard this from people, is that individually within publishers, people are doing that. They're just going, right, I can make my life easier. I'll get, I'll use Copilot, I'll use Claude, I'll use whatever to make my own life easier. And there are benefits coming from that. But of course, if that's not part of an overall organizational strategy, there are risks, because you're giving Claude or whoever access to all of your file servers, all of your systems, all of your diary, your email, and everything like that. Most IT departments will probably want to know about that. They may or may not know about it at the minute, just depending what people are doing. So I think that the risk that we face is that the people at the top of publishing, who quite rightly have to think about risk and what speed we should move at and stuff. All of those are good and necessary conversations to have, but we might find that the organization's just done their own thing anyway.
Okay.
And then you're going to face a different set of challenges. So, the question is, if you were the leader of an organization and you're thinking very hard about your AI strategy and how you want to protect your IP and all of that good stuff, but your whole team is actually just using it in their own way, what do you do then? Do you outlaw the use of all those individual setups that people have made? Do you tell them, no, we can't do that anymore? I think that's going to be a hard sell to most people once they've had a taste of it, because it saves a lot of time. So I think there's a sort of mismatch between our desire to have a perfect strategy and the reality of people who are, as we know, no one in publishing has not enough to do, in my experience. There's always more content coming into the pipeline, particularly in the journals world, but in books as well. Most people are just going to start solving problems themselves, while senior leadership is going, what should our AI strategy be and what tools should we implement and stuff. Most of us are just going, well, I'll just set this up for myself and go on with my day. Momentum that builds from below, if you like, in organizations, where people just start saying, this is the only way I can get through the work that I have to get through, so I'm doing it. And that might push that sort of change forward. It's certainly happening in organizations already. I know of people who are working in exactly that way and going, organizationally we've got Copilot, I've never used that, it's rubbish. I've got my own setup with Claude and ChatGPT and whatever it is that they prefer.
So potentially there's a worst case scenario in which the big global publishers finally announce in a year or longer's time what their AI implementation strategy will be, at which point a whole load of tools which have learned really well how to do the exact tasks that people ask them to do are then outlawed or
or need in some way to be brought in the inside the tent sort of thing. And that's a huge job as well, because everyone will have just set up their own thing and it's doing their own thing their way. To suddenly start to sort of standardize and bring all of those processes into some sort of organizational strategy is huge and possibly, I would argue, not worth doing.
I suppose it's the IT, the cybercrime, the cybersecurity issue then is the really big one, isn't it? It's like, it's all fine as long as it's fine.
Yeah.
It's on the day that someone decides to attack all your data and hold you hostage.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And those are real risks. And, I'm certain that people are worrying about those in IT departments and in leadership teams, but they just don't have the luxury of time to worry too long. They need to start making decisions now and saying, okay, if you're all going to just be using your own setup that you've built yourself, we need to have some clear policies around how that's set up and how it works, and it needs to be, an organizational subscription in a tenanted area of our own and all that kind of stuff. But and many of them are moving to that, but a lot of them aren't. They're just because they're still thinking about it, and it's like, well, it's happening whether you have a policy or not. Stuff is happening. So,
and would that provide an argument for transparency, like as a sometimes our role as consultants is to come up with crazy ideas for publishers, partly so they can say, no, God, that'll never work. And I'm just thinking, is there an argument for saying, okay, you can use what you want as long as we know what you're using and what you're using it for, so that we at the central management and the IT team have some, not control over what you're doing, but some insight into what you're doing. So, if something goes wrong, we at least know where to look.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's going to have, the strategy is going to have those two tiers, right? The leadership should still be thinking about, do we want to implement research integrity tools? Do we want to, go out and purchase some of these sector-specific tools? They should still be having that conversation, but this is a separate thing, right? What's happening on the ground in people's day-to-day tasks. And I think you're right. From where I'm standing, the best option would be not to try and fight that, but to just try and bring it slightly more within within visibility, but also try and make sure that the learnings of that are shared, right? Because actually training a tool to do some of the things you want to do, some people will be much better at than others. It just depends how well you sort of prompt your tool and how well you figured out for yourself how you want that to work. The other risk, of course, is that that's working fine for me on my desktop, but I haven't told anyone else, and they're all still trying to build one. So there's risks all over the place with this, but it is the reality, right? If everybody's using these tools in their life outside of work, you are not going to be able to mandate them away from that when they know it could save them time at work. You're just not.
Yes.
They'll do it anyway. Let's be realistic. Humans are humans, right? Path of least resistance. I set up Claude to build me an app over the weekend. I might just do that for work, because then that will save me from doing this task 12 times a day, every day for the next 5 years, So we got to balance those both, I think, really.
We have conversations with a lot of different publishers, and obviously they all work very differently. They all have different attitudes, and they're at different stages of implementing this stuff, and they have all sorts of different priorities, including normal business things like being bought and sold and merging and all of those kind of things. I wonder if there's anything you're coming across where you're thinking kind of, oh, Lord, no. Of all the things you could possibly do, please do not do that. Or perhaps it's not that dramatic yet.
I think where I see the biggest risks is in the vendor marketplace that publishers are sort of faced with at the moment, and it is a gold rush. There's no other way to put it. There are people lolloping into the sector going, I figured out how to make an LLM do this task. They know nothing about our infrastructure. They know nothing about our industry, really. They're just, a dude with an idea. And I say dude advisedly, because it usually is. And that, I feel, presents a risk, because these are the kind of organizations where they're getting huge amounts of private funding or venture capital funding to go and build this thing and sell it. The ultimate owners of that money are looking for fast growth and a fast exit, right? They want you to go out, bring in as much revenue as you possibly can within 3 years, and then the company will be sold, acquired, whatever. That is a very different kind of business view, business mindset than what we have in publishing, right? Where it's very much trust-based, it's very much long-term relationships, it's very much about building credibility. And there's tons of this stuff coming in. I mean, literally every day I get something new on LinkedIn, or something new someone sends to me saying, hey, I'm building this tool to help you read books better. Right? Great, yeah, no, I don't think that's the problem we need to solve right now, but whatever. And I think it's a real challenge for publishers, because there's pressure from authors, there's pressure from everyone in the ecosystem say, what are we doing? How are we using AI? How is it going to make things better? So they need to be doing stuff, but there's just endless supplies of these half-baked tools coming into the market, and it's quite hard to assess that. Typically in evaluating technologies, you're looking at, does it fit with our tech stack? Does it fit with our cybersecurity? Is it usable? Does it have the features and functions that we need? But with these AI tools, you have no visibility in how they've built their algorithms, how they've built the tool to do what it does. And again, if they don't understand the sector that we're in, that is going to result in some weird outcomes, I think. On the other side, you've got publishing vendors that we've worked with for many years, most of us, the big publishing vendors who deeply, deeply understand our sector and are building tools. But of course, they haven't got the same, pots of cash and investment to just spin something up quickly. So there's kind of two pressures there. I mean, I've had vendors say, I want to show you this tool and it's going to solve all these problems for your publishers. And I'm like, great. And then they show it to me and I'm like, well, what inputs can I put into this? How, what kind of data can you put into it? Oh, well, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets. I'm like, XML? They're like, no one uses XML. I'm like, we literally use it for everything. It is literally, the cement of our industry. It holds everything together. Platforms, metadata, citations, everything runs off XML metadata, right? And you can't just throw that away. Yeah, we can upload all of our PDFs, but it's the stuff that goes around those that's so important for citations, for impact, for all the things that matter to our authors run off some version of an XML sort of schema that's providing that information backwards and forwards to the places that resolve it. So I just have huge concerns about some of this. And the advice for what it's worth, the advice I'm giving to publishers is start with the vendors and find out what they're doing, because it would be better to go slowly and hand in hand with one of them, because they know what you do and they know what's important in that ecosystem, and they know how the infrastructure's been built because they helped us to build it. If someone turns up saying, I've got a black box that will solve your problem, I would be very, very nervous about how that's going to perform at scale over 2 or 3 years, and whether it will still exist in year 4 or 5 is another question. But even before that, you don't know how that's been developed. And again, it's a kind of mindset mismatch. If your main focus is to make as much money as you can out of solving a problem for publishers, mission-driven publishers are not just about the money, right? They never have been. They're serving their community, they're serving their audience. It's not just, can we squeeze the most efficiency out of this process? It's, what do our authors want? What's valuable to them? What makes them come back and publish with us? And that's not always going to be the thing that looks most efficient from the outside, or looks, ripe for automation from the outside. So yeah, that was a bit of a long answer, but I think publishers need to be very cautious, basically, about looking at these tools. And some of them are coming from people who know the industry, and that's a really good starting point. If you talk to that person, they know nothing about our sector, and they start going, this is ripe for disruption, I would be very nervous because there are lots of things we could disrupt about this industry, but there are also lots of barriers and reasons why we don't. And some of those are important for our sector, even though they look inefficient or impractical from the outside. Ripping XML out of the entire academic publishing workflow is not a task that anyone should be undertaking lightly. So yeah,
I suppose as well, it's interesting that slightly uniquely among big industries, what has gone before is very, very important to us. So we have the whole of the library sector, creating a record of all the research that's ever been done. And even though the newest and the best, and we're all forever overusing the words cutting edge and innovative, even though it's very exciting, and that's where a lot of excitement is, all of that is built on work that came before, and all academic subjects have foundational knowledge. And often what you learn in, first year undergrads don't start with immediate research. They start with something that someone discovered in the 19th century, if they're scientists. So for some industries, I imagine actually you could kind of draw a line and move to a whole other system. And for us,
Yeah,
it's what, even if we were to move to a whole other system, we'd want to bring everything with us.
exactly. Yeah,
That would be
exactly.
the, we'd want to scoop up the entirety of publisher platforms and
Yeah,
bring them
yeah,
and bring them
exactly.
into whatever we were doing next.
Yeah,
I think as well that point about companies being around in 5 years' time is also a fascinating one. We are, yeah, the slowness sometimes of academic publishing allows us to be steady,
yeah,
and that's really
absolutely.
important.
Yeah, it is, and you're right. If you think about, you know, how 400 years of journals publishing at Cambridge University Press or somewhere like that, all of that matters to those researchers, as you say, and that's not something that you can just go, oh well, we just won't bother with Chaucer because it's quite hard to digitize.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think there is a huge respect for all of that back catalogue, but more importantly, it's still foundational, as you say, and whether you need AI serving all of that up to you is another question, really, isn't it? Like what
Yeah,
is the value? What is the value of an AI summary of some really deep research that was done 100 years ago? The value is probably in you reading that and applying it to your own context.
yeah.
Or not applying it, making a decision not to apply it. And again, AI summaries are great if you're in a hurry and you just need a quick answer, but that's not really what research does. And again, coming from the outside, people are like, well, I could read all of these journal articles for you and give you a summary in 10 seconds. It's like, yeah, but that's not what we want here. What we want is deep thinking.
Yeah.
And that
it's fascinating
is people going back to the source material. It's not the summary.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, or any projects that you're working on you'd like to chat about?
Well, I have been doing a lot of work both for clients but also sort of independently as part of the SSP group and other forums to try and figure out kind of a taxonomy for all of these AI tools, because that's also part of the problem with all these vendors coming in, right? Some of them are solving one specific thing, like we will tell you if there's generated AI text in this, or we will tell you if this author affiliations don't look right, or there's something dodgy about the authors. But some of them might have been designed for one thing but have applications elsewhere. And again, it's sometimes hard for, I think looking at it, and I'm looking at these all the time, publishers are doing this alongside everything else, but I think it's sometimes hard to actually tell what this tool is for. So we've been, discussing it with various other people. We've been looking at, how do we categorize these? How do we sort of identify where in the workflow they would sit? How do we identify how much human oversight might be required alongside this tool? Is it a solves everything black box kind of thing, or is it's going to give you some reports that you then have to interpret and act on? So trying to kind of get some clarity around that, and I think that's something that publishers will increasingly have to do with these tools. Is, again, we're not in the days anymore where it's just like, okay, we need a content management system, we go and find a content management system. What we're finding now are solutions to problems, and that may be broader or narrower than it first appears. The other thing I would say is, it's always, in my opinion, a good idea to ask yourself if you actually need AI to solve a problem or if you could in fact solve it another way. Because again, some of these AI tools are emerging, and some of the thinking that's emerging is really just sophisticated statistical analysis, and you don't necessarily need an AI tool to get started with that. You could do it with a spreadsheet, or a SQL database or something. So again, I think, let's not rush to dump AI tools everywhere in the workflow, because we've got this potential that we're going to end up with different tools doing all these different tasks, which in itself is going to become a nightmare to manage, right? Something gets to the end of the process, there's the research integrity flag, then you've got to go back and go, well, where did that come in here, or did it come in over here? Was it that tool that identified that, or was it that one? So let's just stop and breathe a bit before we put AI tools everywhere. Let's just go, okay, is this a problem that we need an AI tool for? and maybe have some criteria to help you answer that question. If the answer is yes, great, there's almost certainly a tool out there that you can go and look at. But sometimes the answer might just be, why don't we just put all of our data in one place and analyze it as a whole, rather than looking at it at different segments of the workflow, for example. So that's the other thing. Let's not get so overexcited by AI that we're just shoving it, shoehorning it into every bit of the process, when actually some of it may not need it,
Is there anything else? I feel like we've been fairly comprehensive.
Yeah, no, I think this sort of strategy support is the main thing that publishers would benefit from at the moment, and some of them are, asking for that, and some of them are trying to do it themselves. Maybe the other thing that we haven't really talked about is that a lot of these are problems that one publisher shouldn't be trying to solve alone. Like paper mills and research integrity issues. These need a more kind of industry-wide view, and one that I can see on the horizon is, as more and more researchers are using more and more AI tools to speed up their workflows, the potential volume of papers may increase again, because suddenly researchers have got things that they can get to a published article much more quickly than perhaps they could have in the past, for all sorts of reasons. That needs a kind of industry-wide bit of thinking, I think, because we can't just keep pouring more and more articles into the pipe forever, at some point. So I was at a session with a publisher in the US last week, and one of the researchers in the audience said to me, isn't it a bit funny when an author is publishing like 10 or 12 papers a year? And I said, well, I'm not really qualified to answer that question, but the reality is that AI may make it possible for publishers for researchers to publish much more prolifically. I don't know, but I can see that potential, right? Is it for publishers to say, okay, we think we're only going to allow this person to publish 5 articles a year? That's not really our role, right? Our role is to advance the research and the science. But I could see why he was asking the question as well, because it's like, at what point is this just too much? And we can't distinguish anymore because people are just pumping out material so quickly, and that is a risk. I think good material, good solid scientific research, well-researched material might multiply as well. So then you've got this perfect storm of like paper mills generating all of this content, but actually researchers being able to be much more prolific. How are we going to sift through that sort of soup? And again, I think that's got to be a publisher-wide thing, because, publisher A might say, well, I only got 2 submissions from this researcher last year. Publisher B might say, well, I got 4, but in fact they're different. And the publisher C might be saying, well, I got 10, and they're all different from all of yours. Well, okay, that's starting to look like a problem now, isn't it? May or may not be a research integrity problem, but it's a problem in some form. Like, what do we do with all of these papers? And, do we have some sort of way of sharing that information?
Thank you very much, Nancy, for walking us through all of your thoughts on publishing and AI. And in the traditional fashion, I'll just remind everybody that links to our website and LinkedIn are below. If you want to carry on the conversation about artificial intelligence and the changes on the way for publishing in general, then feel free to get in touch with us at Maverick Publishing Consultants.